Rodriguez. If you collapse out there from hypothermia, you're not honoring the unknown soldiers. You're creating a situation that dishonors the ceremony itself.
Today you'll discover the story of Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, a tomb guard at Arlington National Cemetery, whose dedication during an unexpected winter storm revealed the true meaning of honor and sacrifice. Prepare yourself for an emotional journey that will show you the depths of military commitment and respect for the fallen. Before we begin this incredible story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're listening to this story from. The morning of December 15th, 2023, began like any other at Arlington National Cemetery. Sergeant Michael Rodriguez adjusted his pristine blue uniform, each crease sharp enough to cut paper, each button polished to mirror perfection. At 26 years old, he had been serving as a tomb guard for 3 years, but the weight of responsibility never diminished. The forecast had warned of an incoming winter storm, but Michael had seen worse. Growing up in Minnesota, cold was nothing new to him. What mattered was the mission: to guard the tomb of the unknown soldier with unwavering dedication, regardless of weather, time, or personal comfort. As he stepped out of the quarters building, the first snowflakes began to fall. The cemetery stretched before him in solemn beauty, rows of white headstones creating perfect lines across the rolling hills. But his focus was singular: the white marble tomb that stood as a monument to all unknown soldiers who had given their lives for their country. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, his relief commander, approached with concern etched on her weathered face. At 42, she had overseen countless ceremonies and weather challenges, but something about today felt different. Rodriguez, the National Weather Service just upgraded the storm warning. We're looking at temperatures dropping to -15 degrees, with wind gusts up to 50 miles per hour. The ceremony is still scheduled for 1100 hours, but we might need to consider alternatives. Michael's jaw tightened slightly. In his 3 years of service, he had never missed a changing of the guard ceremony due to weather. The tomb had been guarded continuously since 1937, through world wars, natural disasters, and every conceivable weather condition. Sergeant Walsh, with respect, the unknown soldiers didn't get to choose their weather when they made their sacrifice. Neither will I. The wind began to pick up, sending the falling snow into swirling patterns around the memorial plaza. Visitors who had arrived early for the ceremony huddled together, some questioning whether they should leave before conditions worsened. By 10:30 in the morning, the storm had intensified beyond all predictions. The wind howled across Arlington's sacred grounds with a ferocity that seemed to shake the very foundations of the memorial structures. Snow fell in thick, blinding sheets, accumulating rapidly on the marble steps and walkways surrounding the tomb of the unknown soldier. Michael stood in the guard quarters, methodically checking his equipment one final time. His white gloves were pristine, his rifle cleaned and inspected to perfection. The ceremonial bayonet gleamed despite the dim lighting filtering through the frost-covered windows. Outside, he could hear the storm's relentless assault, but his mind remained focused on the sacred duty ahead. Staff Sergeant Walsh entered the room, her expression grave. Behind her followed Captain David Morrison, the officer in charge of the 3rd United States Infantry Regiment, known as the Old Guard. At 51, Captain Morrison had served in Iraq and Afghanistan, but his current assignment at Arlington held a different kind of weight, one measured not in combat victories, but in the preservation of honor and memory. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Captain Morrison began, his voice carrying the authority of decades of military service, "I've been in contact with Cemetery Administration and the National Weather Service. Current conditions show wind speeds of 47 miles per hour, with gusts reaching 60. The temperature has dropped to -12 degrees, and visibility is less than 50 feet. Michael remained at attention, his eyes fixed straight ahead. "Sir, I understand the conditions are challenging." "Challenging," Staff Sergeant Walsh interjected, moving to the window. "Michael, look outside. We can barely see the tomb from here, and it's only 200 yards away. The visitors' area is completely empty. Everyone with sense has taken shelter." Captain Morrison studied the young sergeant's unwavering posture. He had seen this determination before, in soldiers who understood that some duties transcended personal comfort or safety, but he also carried the responsibility for his men's welfare. "Rodriguez, I need you to understand something. This isn't about proving your dedication or toughness. We all know your commitment is beyond question, but if you collapse out there from hypothermia or frostbite, you're not honoring the unknown soldiers. You're creating a situation that dishonors the ceremony itself. For the first time, Michael's rigid posture softened slightly. He turned to face his commanding officer, his dark eyes reflecting both respect and unwavering resolve. "Sir, permission to speak freely." "Granted. 3 months ago, my grandfather passed away. He was a World War II veteran who served in the Pacific Theater. Before he died, he told me about a buddy of his, Private First Class Tommy Chen from San Francisco. Tommy was killed during the Battle of Okinawa, but his body was never recovered. My grandfather spent 60 years wondering if Tommy might be one of the unknown soldiers resting in that tomb." The room fell silent except for the wind rattling the windows. Michael's voice remained steady, but there was an emotional undercurrent that hadn't been there before. "Every time I walk those 21 steps, I think about Tommy Chen. I think about all the families who never got to say goodbye, who never got to visit a grave, who only have this tomb as a place to remember their loved ones. Sir, those soldiers didn't get to choose their weather when they made the ultimate sacrifice. The least I can do is honor them regardless of a little cold." Staff Sergeant Walsh exchanged a meaningful glance with Captain Morrison. She had served alongside many dedicated soldiers, but there was something in Rodriguez's words that transcended mere duty. It was personal, spiritual even. Captain Morrison walked to the window, watching the snow continue to accumulate. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in 20 minutes, and protocol demanded a decision. He thought about the thousands of visitors who came to Arlington each year, seeking connection with loved ones they had lost, finding solace in the unwavering dedication of the tomb guards. "Sergeant Walsh, what's the current visitor count in the amphitheater?" "Sir, approximately 30 people have remained despite the weather. They're bundled up in the covered seating area, but they're there." 30 people, Captain Morrison repeated thoughtfully. 30 people who braved this storm because this ceremony means something to them. Probably family members of fallen soldiers, veterans, people who understand the significance of what we do here. He turned back to Michael, his decision crystallizing. "Rodriguez, if you're determined to proceed, we'll modify the protocol. Instead of the standard 30-minute ceremony, we'll conduct a shortened version, 15 minutes maximum. You'll have Sergeant Walsh and Corporal Jenkins positioned nearby for immediate assistance if needed, and you'll wear the authorized cold weather gear under your ceremonial uniform." Michael's face showed a flicker of disappointment. "Sir, the cold weather gear will alter the appearance of the uniform. The ceremony should maintain its traditional—" "That's an order, Sergeant," Captain Morrison interrupted firmly. "Honor and sacrifice don't require martyrdom. The unknown soldiers would want their guards to serve with wisdom, not just courage." As the 3 soldiers prepared for the modified ceremony, none of them could have anticipated that this storm-battered day would become one of the most memorable and meaningful changing of the guard ceremonies in Arlington's history. The decision to proceed would soon reveal something profound about the nature of dedication, respect, and the unbreakable bond between the living and the fallen. At exactly 1100 hours, despite the raging blizzard, Sergeant Michael Rodriguez emerged from the guard quarters. The cold hit him like a physical blow, even with the thermal layers beneath his ceremonial uniform. The wind carried ice crystals that stung his exposed face, and each breath felt like inhaling frozen daggers, but his steps remained measured, precise, unwavering. The 30 visitors who had chosen to remain huddled together in the covered amphitheater seating, their breath visible in small clouds despite the shelter. Among them sat Eleanor Patterson, an 83-year-old woman from Ohio, clutching a faded photograph of her brother who had been killed in Vietnam. His body was never recovered from the jungle, and for 48 years, she had made an annual pilgrimage to Arlington, believing in her heart that he might rest beneath the marble tomb. Next to her, Marine veteran James Sullivan wrapped his arms around his teenage son, Marcus. James had lost his leg to an IED in Afghanistan and wanted his son to understand the meaning of sacrifice and service. Despite the brutal weather, he refused to leave. "Dad, why don't they just cancel it?" Marcus whispered, his teeth chattering. "Because, son," James replied, his voice thick with emotion, "some things are more important than comfort. That guard out there is keeping a promise that's been unbroken for 86 years. As Michael approached the tomb, the wind intensified, creating a whiteout effect that made the marble monument appear and disappear like a ghost in the swirling snow. His rifle, despite the protective measures, began accumulating ice on the barrel. Each of his 21 steps became a battle against the elements, but his pace never faltered. Staff Sergeant Walsh and Corporal Jenkins positioned themselves strategically around the perimeter, their eyes never leaving Michael. Walsh spoke into her radio, maintaining constant communication with the medical team standing by in a heated vehicle just out of sight. "Control, this is Walsh. Guard is proceeding with ceremony. Visibility approximately 20 feet. Wind speed steady at 45 miles per hour. Guard appears stable." As Michael reached the tomb and began his inspection, something extraordinary happened. The small group of visitors, witnessing this display of unwavering dedication in the face of nature's fury, began to stand. One by one, despite the cold, despite the wind, despite every instinct telling them to seek warmth, they rose to their feet in silent tribute. Eleanor Patterson struggled to stand on her arthritic legs, but James Sullivan immediately offered his support. Soon all 30 visitors stood in the howling wind, their own small act of respect mirroring the guard's dedication. Michael, focused entirely on his duty, was unaware of the profound impact his actions were having. As he performed the traditional inspection of the tomb, running his white-gloved hands along the marble surface to check for any debris or imperfection, the wind suddenly shifted. A massive gust, later measured at 62 miles per hour, struck him directly. The force was tremendous. Michael's body swayed, his rifle nearly torn from his grasp by the wind. Ice crystals pelted his face with such intensity that his eyes began to water, the tears freezing almost instantly on his cheeks. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, it appeared he might fall, but he didn't. Drawing on reserves of strength that seemed to come from somewhere beyond his physical body, Michael steadied himself. He completed the inspection with the same meticulous care he would have shown on a perfect spring day. Then, as he prepared to begin his measured walk along the black mat, something happened that would be talked about for years to come. The wind, which had been howling relentlessly for hours, suddenly died to almost nothing. The snow continued to fall, but the violent gusts that had been threatening to knock Michael off his feet simply stopped. In that moment of relative calm, his voice rang out clear and strong across the Memorial Plaza. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Arlington National Cemetery and the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. I am Sergeant Michael Rodriguez of the 3rd United States Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard. It is my honor to serve as your sentinel today." His words, spoken with the same crisp authority used in perfect weather, carried across the snow-covered grounds with startling clarity. The visitors, still standing despite the cold, felt a collective shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. The soldiers resting here represent all of America's unknown dead from World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. They gave their lives in service to our nation, and though their names are lost to us, their sacrifice is eternal. Today, despite nature's challenge, we maintain our vigil because their service knew no weather, no comfort, no compromise. Eleanor Patterson began to cry, her tears mixing with the snowflakes on her weathered cheeks. In that moment, she felt a connection to her lost brother that transcended the decades of grief and uncertainty. James Sullivan squeezed his son's shoulder, knowing that this moment would stay with the boy for the rest of his life. As Michael began his 21 steps back toward the guard quarters, the wind remained mysteriously calm. Each step was deliberate, measured, perfect. The ice that had been accumulating on his rifle seemed to glisten in the gray light, creating an almost ethereal effect. Captain Morrison, watching from the administrative building through binoculars, felt a profound sense of pride mixed with awe. In 30 years of military service, he had witnessed many acts of courage and dedication, but there was something transcendent about what he was observing. "Control," Staff Sergeant Walsh's voice crackled over the radio. "Ceremony proceeding normally. Weather conditions have improved temporarily. Guard maintaining perfect form." But as Michael reached the halfway point of his walk, the storm seemed to remember its fury. The wind returned with vengeance, and what happened next would transform this ceremony from a simple display of duty into something that would be remembered as one of the most powerful moments in Arlington's history. The wind returned with a vengeance that seemed almost supernatural in its timing and intensity. As Michael reached the center of his ceremonial walk, a gust measured later at 71 miles per hour struck the Memorial Plaza with the force of a freight train. The sound was deafening, a howling, screaming wall of air that seemed to shake the very ground beneath the tomb. This time, Michael couldn't maintain his footing. The wind caught him mid-step, and for a terrifying moment he stumbled forward, his rifle sliding from his grip and clattering onto the frozen marble. The 30 visitors gasped collectively, some instinctively moving forward as if to help. despite the distance and barriers between them. Staff Sergeant Walsh immediately spoke into her radio. "Control guard is down, medical team move in now." But as the words left her mouth, something remarkable happened. Michael, despite the brutal cold that had numbed his extremities, despite the wind that continued to pummel him, slowly pushed himself to his knees. His movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. Instead of accepting help or retreating to safety, he began to retrieve his rifle with the same careful precision he would use in perfect conditions. The medical team, already moving toward the tomb, stopped at Captain Morrison's raised hand. "Wait," he commanded, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Let him finish." Michael's hands, even through his gloves, were so cold that he could barely feel the rifle as he lifted it. But muscle memory and 3 years of training guided his movements. He stood slowly, his body fighting against the wind, and resumed his position. Then, in a voice that somehow carried over the howling storm, he spoke words that weren't part of any official ceremony. "I'm sorry," he said, addressing the tomb directly. "You deserved better than that." Eleanor Patterson, still standing with the other visitors, felt her heart break and soar simultaneously. Here was a young man, battered by nature's fury, apologizing to fallen soldiers for a momentary stumble that no reasonable person would fault him for. Michael straightened his uniform with hands that shook from cold, not fear. He repositioned his rifle and, incredibly, began his 21 steps again from the beginning. This wasn't protocol. This was personal. The wind seemed to sense his determination and responded with even greater fury. Snow whipped around him in spirals, creating a white tornado effect that made him appear and disappear like a figure in a dream. But his steps never wavered again. Each footfall was placed with mathematical precision, each turn executed with parade ground perfection. James Sullivan leaned down to his son Marcus, who was watching with wide eyes. "Son, you're witnessing something extraordinary. That young man isn't just following orders anymore. He's making a choice to honor something bigger than himself, no matter the cost." As Michael completed his walk and approached the relief point, the ceremony should have ended. The replacement guard should have emerged to take over the watch. But the storm had made the planned changing of the guard impossible. No one else could safely navigate the conditions that Michael had somehow endured. Instead of leaving his post, Michael turned to face the tomb once more. In a decision that would later be debated in military circles, but never questioned by those who witnessed it, he spoke directly to the visitors. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to the weather conditions, I will be extending my watch until conditions improve. The tomb will not go unguarded. Thank you for your dedication in remaining here today. Your presence honors these soldiers as much as any ceremony could." What happened next defied explanation. As if responding to his words, the wind began to subside once again. The snow continued to fall, but the violent gusts that had been threatening to tear the ceremony apart simply faded away. In the relative calm, Michael resumed his measured pace, walking his post as he had been trained, as guards had done for 86 years before him. The 30 visitors, witnessing this display of unwavering commitment, began to understand that they weren't just observing a military ceremony. They were witnessing the embodiment of honor itself. Several began to weep openly, not from the cold, but from the profound emotional impact of what they were experiencing. Captain Morrison, still watching through his binoculars, made a decision that would later be recorded in Arlington's official records. He picked up his radio and spoke to the entire cemetery staff. "All personnel, be advised. What we're witnessing today represents the highest ideals of military service. Document everything. This story needs to be preserved." For 47 minutes, Sergeant Michael Rodriguez continued his solitary vigil, in conditions that meteorologists would later classify as life-threatening. The storm gradually began to weaken, but Michael's dedication never wavered. Each step remained precise, each turn executed with ceremonial perfection, as if the brutal weather was merely an inconvenience rather than a genuine threat to his safety. At 11:47, the snow finally began to lighten and visibility slowly improved. Captain Morrison made the decision to send out the relief guard, Corporal Sarah Mitchell, who had been standing ready despite the dangerous conditions. As she approached through the thinning snow, the contrast was striking. Michael, ice-covered and weathered by the storm, stood as straight and proud as he had at the ceremony's beginning. The changing of the guard proceeded with full military precision. Despite his ordeal, Michael's movements remained crisp and professional, as he transferred responsibility to Corporal Mitchell. But as he prepared to leave his post, something unprecedented occurred. The 30 visitors who had remained standing throughout the extended ceremony began to applaud. It started slowly, with Eleanor Patterson's gloved hands coming together in a soft clap that was barely audible. But it grew, spreading through the small crowd, until it became a thunderous ovation that echoed across the memorial plaza. Military protocol strictly prohibited applause during tomb ceremonies, but Captain Morrison, watching from his position, made no move to stop it. Some moments transcended regulation, and this was one of them. Michael, trained never to acknowledge crowds during ceremonies, found himself facing an impossible choice. Protocol demanded he ignore the applause and proceed directly to the guard quarters. But the emotion of the moment, the connection he felt with these dedicated visitors, who had endured the storm alongside him, compelled him to act from his heart rather than his training manual. He stopped, turned toward the visitors, and rendered a slow, deliberate salute. It lasted only 3 seconds, but those 3 seconds would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives. Eleanor Patterson, still clutching her brother's photograph, felt a sense of closure she had been seeking for nearly 5 decades. James Sullivan watched his son's face transform with understanding of what true service meant. The other 28 visitors, each carrying their own stories of loss and remembrance, found in Michael's dedication a living embodiment of the values their loved ones had died defending. As Michael finally walked toward the guard quarters, his steps slightly unsteady from exhaustion and cold, the storm clouds began to break apart. Shafts of sunlight pierced through the gray sky, illuminating the snow-covered tomb in a way that seemed almost divine. Later, after medical evaluation confirmed that Michael had suffered only minor frostbite on his fingertips, Captain Morrison would write in his official report, "Sergeant Rodriguez's actions today exemplified the highest traditions of military service. His dedication under extreme conditions served as a powerful reminder that the honor we show our fallen heroes knows no weather, no hardship, no compromise." The story of that December day would spread far beyond Arlington's gates. News outlets would cover it, social media would share it, and military academies would study it. But for the 30 people who witnessed it firsthand, and for Michael Rodriguez himself, it would always be something simpler and more profound, a moment when duty, honor, and love for fallen comrades transcended every obstacle nature could provide. The tomb's eternal flame continued to burn as it always had, as it always would. But on that snowy December day, it burned a little brighter, reflected in the unwavering spirit of a young sergeant who understood that some promises are too sacred to break, regardless of the cost.